section, we are going to talk about another type of transformation, which is rotations. And a rotation is a turning of a geometric figure. The center of rotation is the fixed point about which the figure is turned. The number of degrees the figure turns is called the angle of rotation. And you can rotate either clockwise or counterclockwise. The following is a summary of a counterclockwise rotation in the coordinate plane. But before we get to that, we're going to take a look at a rule for rotations, and what your rule for a rotation will look like. It's going to have a lowercase r, that's going to tell you that you're doing a rotation. Then it's going to have the degree of what you're rotating by, the angle of rotation, and then it's going to have the center of rotation, so what you're rotating around. And then it's going to have letters or some sort of figure that you are rotating. So just know the little r stands for rotation, and then the next number is going to be the degree of what you're rotating by. So here's a summary. Main angles of rotation we're going to be dealing with are 90 degree, 90 degree rotation. There is a 180 degree rotation, and then 270. We won't really talk much about 360 because that will just bring you all the way back to the beginning. So the main ones we're going to talk about are 90, 180, and 270. And these are all counterclockwise rotations. And these rules apply to counterclockwise rotations. We'll talk about what to do when we get to a counterclockwise rotation here at the bottom. But all rotations are revolve around counterclockwise. The rules, how I like to think of it, is what you do when you have a 90 degree rotation. I would write this down. You're going to flip the point first. So take a look at this example. We're starting with G. If we flip that point, it's going to become 3, 2. That's your first step. Then you're going to, after you flip, change the sign of the first, which is the new first. Okay? So we flip the point, change the sign of the first. So the positive 3 is going to become a negative 3. And that will give you a 90 degree rotation. Okay? Follow those rules. When you're asked to do a 90 degree rotation, flip the point, change the sign of the first. Okay? And you can also think of that each quadrant is 90 degrees. So if we rotate one quadrant 90 degrees, you're going to jump one quadrant. Okay? So by flipping the point and changing the first, it will bump you one quadrant. Okay. If we look at a 180 degree rotation, these are the rules you're going to follow. And again, I would write this down. You're not going to flip the point when it's a 180 degree rotation. When there's no flip, but instead you're going to change the sign of both. So there's no flip, just change the sign of both. Okay, and make sure you write these down. It's super helpful. So again, we look at this example, we're still dealing with a point 2, 3. Well, we're not going to flip it. We're just changing the sign of both terms. So they're both positive. That means they're both going to become negative. It's going to end up being negative 2, negative 3. And think, again, each quadrant represents 90. So when you're making a 180 degree rotation, you're jumping 2 quadrants. So 1, 2. So by just changing the sign of both and not flipping, that will jump you 2 quadrants. The next one, when you rotate something 270 degrees, we're going to go back to flipping. So you're going to flip the point. So let's go ahead and do that first. So we're rotating this point 270. We're going to flip it. But this time, we're going to change the sign of the second. So in this case, our new second would be 2, and it's positive, so we're going to turn negative. By doing that, that will jump 3 quadrants, which is a 270 degree rotation. A good way of remembering it is 180, there's no flip. All the other ones you will flip. To remember whether it's the first or the second, think 90 degrees comes first, so you change the sign of the first. 270 comes last, so you change the second one and the last one. Okay, that's one way how I like to think of it. So just remember these rules, and then you'll have rotations down. We'll take a look at some examples. Here, if we look at example 1, we're rotating at 180, and if it doesn't indicate whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise, always assume counterclockwise. Okay? So we want to rotate this figure 180 degrees, and the O just stands for about the origin, so just around the very center of the graph. Well, what I'm going to do is write down each point. -5, -2, -3, -3, -3, -4, and then P is -4, -4. Plot and label each point. And we're going to get a new point, S prime, R prime, Q prime, and P prime. Okay. Again, follow those rules that we talked about up here. Okay? When we're rotating something 180 degrees, you should have wrote this down. There's no flip. So we're not flipping the points at all. We're just changing the signs of the first. So again, these points, there's no flip. So they're staying in the same spot. You just have to go through and change the sign of all of them. So those are both negative, they're both going to turn positive. Those are both negative, they're both going to turn positive. Just change all of them to the opposite. And then all you have to do is plot and label your new points, and you're done. So 5, 2, and that's S prime. 3, 3, and that is R prime. 3, 4, and that is Q prime. And then 4, 4, and that is P prime. And then next. Yep. Oh boy. Oh boy. Smart boy's going haywire. Yeah, not too bad. You just have to memorize those rules. 180 degrees, no flip, change the sign of both. For 2, we're going to rotate 90 degrees about the origin, and again, if it's not indicated, it's always counterclockwise. So we're going to do the same thing that we did with 1. We're going to write down the original points and label. Doesn't matter what order. A is -4, 1. B is -2, 1. C is -2, 3. And D is -5, 4. Okay. And then we're going to follow those rules, and we're going to get a completely new point. Well, when we're rotating something 90 degrees, we're going to flip. So do that first. Flip each point. Don't worry about the sign change. Just flip. Okay. First step, flip the point when it's 90. Then, because it's 90, we change the sign of the first. So we go through. First one's positive, turns negative. First one's positive, turns negative. Turns negative. Turns negative. And there's your new point. So plot your new one. -1, -4, and label A prime. -1, -2, B prime. -3, -2, C prime. And then -4, -5 is D prime. And then you just connect. Done. And just follow those rules. Replot your points. We look at this last one with 3. We're rotating it clockwise 90 degrees. So you have to pay close attention when it says clockwise. Those rules that we talked about don't apply clockwise. So we have to make it counterclockwise. So think the direction of a clock goes this way, right? So if we're rotating it 90 degrees clockwise, we're jumping one quadrant that direction, the same direction as a clock. So we have to figure out, well, which way is that the same as counterclockwise? Well, to go counterclockwise, we're going to start here, and there's 1 quadrant, 2 quadrants. We're going to jump 3 quadrants. Okay, well, when you jump 3 quadrants, that's 390 degrees. So that's 270. So when it says 90 degrees clockwise, that's really doing a 270 degree rotation counterclockwise. Vice versa. If it was clockwise 270, it's the same as counterclockwise 90. It's just the opposite. If it's clockwise 180, that's the same exact thing as counterclockwise 180. So you don't have to worry about 180. Just flip-flop it. 90 degrees clockwise is 270 counter. Okay, so let's pick it up. Same as 270 degrees counterclockwise. So follow those same rules as counterclockwise. So write down those original points. They're not labeled. If it helps, you can label them. So this first one's negative or 0, -1. Then we have -2, -4. And then we have -4, -3. So when we rotate something 270 degrees, we flip. Don't worry about the sign change, just flip first. And then we change the sign of the second. Well, we can't really change the sign of 0. But this guy's going to become positive, and that guy's going to become positive. Plot your new points. -1, 0. -4, 2. And then -3, 4. You might have to sit down, take a few minutes, memorize those rules. But remember, 90 degree rotation, flip the point, change the first. 180, there's no flip, change both. 270, flip the point, change the second. You need to rewatch the video. If not, go ahead and get started on your practice.